A few studies have recently come out about fake news, one from Yale, one from Oxford. Obviously, they're not the only studies that have come out, but they're ones I'm addressing specifically for a few reasons. Now, the study from Oxford is on polarization, partisanship, and junk news, and you may have noticed I've made a few videos about this already. The reason I'm doing another video about this, I recently contacted the team responsible for the study to try and figure out how they came to their conclusion, what was included in the seed list of websites that they looked at. And what I found was pretty damn interesting. It seems that they don't even know what some of these left-wing websites are. When this study first came out, Oxford published a press release, which is a bit hyperbolic. Before I get into all of this, let me give a quick shout out to today's sponsor. All of you guys, if you haven't already, go to patreon.com/Timcast and become a patron today. There are several different tiers to choose from. Most notably is Tier 1. At $10 per month, you get access to behind-the-scenes photos and videos, commentary. When you support me on Patreon, you allow me to do the work that I do, so please consider becoming a patron at whatever level you feel comfortable today. Oxford put out this press release. Trump supporters and extreme right share widest range of junk news. A network of Donald Trump supporters shares the widest range of junk news on Twitter, and a network of extreme far-right conservatives on Facebook, according to analysis by Oxford University. Now, if you've been following my past few videos, you'd know that, holy crap, it's kind of crazy that they're making this assessment when you realize that the study itself predominantly looked at right-wing websites. So the obvious conclusion that anyone could find is that if you take a large list of mostly conservative sites and then try and determine who shared those sites, it would be no surprise to anybody that it's mostly the right. Fake news is a big problem, and I do believe that for the most part, these smaller fake news websites that are made by dudes in their living room, it really does target the right more often. Why? Well, there's a lot of older conservatives who don't understand the internet, and they're just going to click share. They don't know what this website is, they just see the headline and say, wow, that's crazy. Younger people tend to lean left, and they also tend to understand that there's a lot of bunk websites that are easily manufactured and fake news. So I think it is fair to say that the right does share more fake news. But it's not fair to make a study claiming that Trump supporters are the worst, that they share the overwhelming majority of fake news, when you omit the fact that there's extremely well-funded left-wing sites that have been omitted from this study. The press release goes on. Researchers at the Oxford Internet Institute analyzed 3 months of social media activity of US Twitter and Facebook users from November 2017 to January 2018, the period leading up to President Trump's latest State of the Union address. They find that on Twitter, a network of Trump supporters shares the widest range of junk news and circulates more junk news than all other political audience groups combined. On Facebook, extreme hard-right pages, distinct from Republican pages, both share the widest range and circulate the largest volume of junk news compared with all other audiences. Specifically, a group of hard conservatives circulates the widest range of junk news and accounts for the majority of junk news traffic in the sample. Now, forgive me if you've already watched my past videos on this, but I wanted to make sure that anybody who is stepping into the story without the previous context understood the basis of this video. Now, I would like to present to you the emails that I sent to the Oxford team and their responses. In my first email, I said, howdy. I'm a journalist looking into the study recently published on partisanship. The questions I had were, why did your study refer to left-wing political journalists as mainstream media? There are outlets like Vox, Splinter, Mike, Jezebel, and other sites in the Fusion Media Group, etc., that are left-wing counterparts to sites like The Daily Caller. I am curious as to why the examples predominantly list conservative news, but omit sites like those previously mentioned. Were they considered in your research? Some of the links given as examples contain factually correct information. For instance, campus reform has police reports and video backing up the story. Is junk news a term created for this study, and were the parameters of what constitutes junk news also created by your team? Many large news sites refuse to correct their stories as documented by newsdiffs.org. In many instances, the New York Times and WAPO have refused to correct or accurately source information. The New York Daily News is also listed as an example of junk news. Does the New York Times and WAPO fall into the same category? To be more specific, is what constitutes junk news a matter of consistency? If WAPO refuses to correct once, does that make them junk news? Or is it more a likelihood to correct? Thank you for your time. In the first response, they said, hi Tim, thanks for your interest in our study. Saw your YouTube video too. The seed list was collected in a methodological way. based on what content was being shared during the US election 2016. I'm gonna stop right there. The press release says that it was the 3 months up until the State of the Union address, not the election. So there's a bit of a conflicting message here. Which is more likely to be true? In this instance, I think that the researchers probably know better than the person who put out the press release, but again, conflicting information. We wanted to focus on the pages that were most central to the political debate over social media, so we decided to look into the most shared pages for the seed list. You are right to notice that a lot of these sources were more right-leaning. As for the labeling of the mainstream cluster, a supervised machine learning algorithm comes up with labels for the segments which you are referring to. One of those labels was left-wing accounts and public pages. Looking into the accounts and pages, we decided mainstream would be a more fitting label. To make that clear, the accounts and public pages are not the same as sources. The groups were identified based on content shared, interactions with content, liking, and following behavior. In a second step to our analysis, we then looked into what content from the seed list of junk news these outlets were sharing. Our assessment of junk news evaluates on a source level, rather than on individual stories. That is exactly because of your observation that factual and unfactual information sometimes get mixed. For example, we saw many junk sources copy and pasting content from sources like AP to appear trustworthy, and then mixing it with conspiratorial junk stories. Our methods section details how we have come up with the concept of junk news and what classifies as junk news. To be classified as junk, a source needs to fall into 3 of the 5 criteria: style, bias, counterfeit, professionalism, credibility. Hope this helps. Lisa Marie. So I know the emails might be a bit boring and long-winded, but I do want to show them for the sake of transparency, so I hope you could appreciate that. But now what it seems to me is that yes, junk news is a term created specifically for this study, which presents a bit of a problem in itself. And yes, the seed list is more right-leaning, as they have informed me. So I responded. Suffice it to say that if many of the sources are more right-leaning, that your findings would be obvious. Surely Trump supporters are less likely to share a Mic.com article. Al Jazeera Plus, for instance, would fall into your classification as junk news and are one of the most widely shared outlets on Facebook. Is Mike, Vox, Splinter, Fusion Media Group, AJ Plus, for instance, included in your seed list? Or is it that when generating the seed list from the 22 million plus tweets, there was no significant representation from these websites? Keep in mind, I asked that question for a specific reason. I think it would be incredibly naive of anyone to think that Mic.com, Al Jazeera Plus, were not getting significant shares 3 months before the election or 3 months before the State of the Union address, whichever they actually sourced. I don't know, conflicting information here. The response I got from a different individual: "Hi Tim, thanks for your note and interest in our work. Yes, your instinct is right. If the source wasn't shared during the specific 3-month period when this sample was collected, it isn't in the typology. From what I know of the literature, Al Jazeera English would probably have been cataloged as professional news. Al Jazeera Arabic would probably have been cataloged as junk, but the latter site rarely appears in our US samples." I didn't mention Al Jazeera English or Al Jazeera Arabic. I'm specifically referring to Al Jazeera Plus, which boasted over 2.2 billion video views recently, and it seems like maybe they don't know what Al Jazeera Plus is. He also states, yes, if people weren't sharing these links, then they didn't appear in their typology. I don't think anyone of any political leaning would believe that no one shared a Mic.com story, that no one shared a Jezebel or Fusion or Vox or Al Jazeera Plus story. That is absolutely ridiculous to believe. Based on that response, I think it is safe to say, and I will have to say it this way, in my opinion, the Oxford study is absolute fake news. This press release, for one, is conflicting to what the team actually told me. We don't know when the sample was actually collected because Oxford's press release says it was between 2017 and 2018, but then they told me it was 3 months before the election, so which is it? I don't actually know. They also essentially make the claim that nobody was sharing Mic.com or Al Jazeera Plus in whatever period they were looking at. That's insane. These websites boast some of the most digital traffic, period. So to act like they're not getting shared is absolutely ridiculous. How they came up with their seed list, I don't know. They simply called it a known seed list. This study, in my opinion, is fundamentally flawed and should be entirely discredited. There is one more story that I don't want to get into too much, but this is from Yale, and you can see that they've also done a study on fake news. And in the mainstream media section, you can see that they list Salon.com, though there is a little asterisk. And then in the hyper-partisan section, once again, it is almost entirely right-wing. Though they do include Daily Kos and US Uncut, for the most part, chicks on the right, right-wing news, the Daily Caller, the Daily Wire. These studies do call out some of the most prominent right-wing websites, but they do not call out the more prominent left-wing websites. The reason I take issue with this is that everyone keeps saying fake news is a right-wing problem. It's not the first time we've heard this. And certainly there is a problem among older people on the right with sharing fake news, absolutely. But keep in mind, younger left-wing individuals share articles and stories and videos to a much more extreme degree from these hyper-partisan left-wing websites. Many of the sites that are listed in these studies that they call hyper-partisan right-wing are rather poorly funded. Certainly there are hyper-partisan fake news websites that are pretty bad, but some of these sites are considered to be fairly decent, albeit hyper-partisan. When you look at the hyper-partisan websites on the left, they have San Francisco offices. They are part of massive international distribution networks. One of these companies actually has an entire floor in Freedom Tower. I don't want to call anybody out, but these companies are certainly making a ton of money and are extremely well funded. And not only that, Newsweek, for instance, was recently busted for ad fraud buying fake traffic. And they're not the only ones that do this. I can tell you, I can confirm, many of these far left digital websites have actually told me to my face that they buy traffic from ad networks. Okay, so this is a practice where they try and puff their numbers up by buying traffic rights from click farm websites. You know, there'll be a website that says like 25 photos of Tom Cruise, and every time you want to see the next photo, it's an entirely new page. And what that does is it generates page views, and then they sell those rights to mainstream digital left-wing whatever outlets, who can then go to advertisers and say, look how many views we got, when in reality they didn't. It is a somewhat nefarious practice, in my opinion. I get really frustrated seeing this kind of information omitted from all of these stories, because certainly the far left and the far right, no one is innocent here, but the far left has institutional power and a lot of money behind them. So it's not surprising then that the Oxford study is going to omit them from their stories. Why? Well, I would imagine the people at Oxford are in their bubble and don't know anything about these sites. In fact, as I pointed out in the emails they sent me, it seems like they don't even know what Al Jazeera Plus is, even though Al Jazeera Plus boasts 2.2 billion Facebook video views in 2015. Certainly, I don't think Al Jazeera Plus has gone down in traffic. At the very least, we can say that if they hovered around the same area, regardless, even if they generated 50%, a billion video views is substantially more traffic. They're getting substantially more shares than the Daily Caller or the Daily Wire, presumably combined, because these are relatively small sites. And I guess the last thing you should take away from this is that even in the email they said, based on a supervised machine learning algorithm, it came up with labels for the segments, which I was referring to, and one of those labels was left-wing accounts and public pages. Looking into the accounts and pages, we decided mainstream would be a more fitting label. The point being that even when they took a large cluster of left-wing political journalists, they decided mainstream media made the most sense. That the mainstream is left-wing. So again, I'll just end it here. My final assessment, I will not be making another video about this, but I was kind of frustrated and shocked to learn that these researchers probably don't even know what these websites are. But I'll just say it, I believe this study is and should be entirely discredited. It is, in my opinion, fake news. But let me know what you think in the comments below. We will keep the conversation going. You can follow me on Twitter at Timcast. Stay tuned because there's going to be breaking news today, and we have a big special Culture War podcast for you tomorrow, which should be really fun and exciting because we're actually going to be on the ground in Seattle producing this episode. We'll see how it turns out. It's the first time we're doing anything like this, so stay tuned. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you tomorrow.